let's go ahead and introduce our next guest, Zachary Foster. He's a historian of Palestine. Zachary, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we have an interesting story to talk about here because last week was an insane, almost like experiment in propaganda. When we saw, you know what, I'm just going to tell you the mainstream version of it, Zachary, and then you can tell me what actually happened. So for those who were, who were reading the New York Times or the Washington Post or just Israeli media, there were, 1940s style or 1930s style pogroms in Amsterdam against innocent Israeli Jews who were just, hanging out in Amsterdam to cheer on their soccer team, and just hordes of barbaric, brown people in Amsterdam came for them in these horrific anti-Semitic riots and beat people up. And it's just, like Kristallnacht all over again. Can you tell us what reality was like in relation to what I just said?
Well, the mainstream media was correct that there was, in fact, a pogrom committed in Amsterdam. But they just mixed up who was the perpetrator of the pogrom and who was the victim. In fact, the perpetrator of the pogrom were the Israeli hooligans who, the night before this soccer match, went around the central area, central and western areas of Amsterdam, ripping out Palestinian flags from homes, menacing bystanders. We have reports that they threw beer cans on people. They were breaking windows of people's homes, chanting "Death to the Arabs," "May your village burn." These are familiar slogans to those who follow Israeli protests. These are very commonly heard slogans. You'll hear it, for example, on Jerusalem Day, also known as Apartheid Day, that was celebrated this past spring. We also heard chants such as, "There is no school in Gaza because all of the children are dead." These are Israeli hooligans rampaging around the city of Amsterdam the night before the soccer match. And then during the soccer match itself, those same hooligans disrupted a 1-minute silence for the flood victims of the flood that ravaged Valencia, Spain. In part, apparently, because the Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez urged countries around the world to stop selling arms to Israel. After the match, and by the way, just so folks can access the reports themselves, the footage we have from the Dutch YouTuber Bender, a 16-year-old Dutch YouTuber, is one of the most is really one of the only journalists who was actually on the ground witnessing, who bore witness to these scenes. And you can access that YouTube channel. It's a 15-minute video where you can see all this footage. You also have footage taken by Annette de Graaf, who is another citizen journalist, a Dutch journalist in Amsterdam, who also has footage from the incident. And so after the game itself, that those same Israeli hooligans, by the way, many of whom are themselves reservists in Israel's army, the same army that is currently carrying out a genocide in Gaza. So those same hooligans, Israeli army reservists, they start to uproot, they start to grab metal pipes from construction zones, they grab metal sticks, they grab smoke bombs, they threw, it's unclear exactly what, but they threw an object at a police car. So we have violence carried out by the Israeli hooligans against the Dutch police. Then they go around the city, apparently looking for anyone who's Muslim or who appears to be of Arab descent, attacking them. They attacked a taxi driver, desperately looking for a fight. And lo and behold, there was resistance, and there were many apparently young Muslim, primarily apparently from Moroccan backgrounds, Dutch citizens who fought back. And some 5 or 10 Israelis wound up hospitalized, all of whom have since been released. But that is the story. The story was the pogrom was carried out by the Israeli hooligans against the people of Holland. And I just want to emphasize one last point, which is that it's not uncommon to see violence and riots break out after these kinds of soccer matches. Hooligans are infamous for the violence that they often perpetrate during, before, and after these types of matches. But this was very different. This was the hooligans not attacking the opposing team's fans, which is usually what happens. These were hooligans going after, seeking out Arab and Muslim locals, people who had nothing to do with the match, just innocent bystanders, and attacking them. And that's the story.
Yeah, I didn't even know some of those details about how they were like explicitly targeting Muslim people in Amsterdam. Just really gets worse and worse. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this is how this was almost like a gift to the Zionist forces, or at least when it initially the news started breaking, Zionists rushed to it, and they said, "Oh, look at this pogrom happening in Amsterdam." They really wanted to bring a lot of attention to it, and then when the details started coming out, they are completely silent. I saw this Zionist I know from my hometown share this image on social media that said, "This is why I feel like there needs to be a state of Israel. This is why I feel unsafe as a Jew in the world." No, I mean, you can't make this up. And like, I guess, there is this history, and I want you to speak to this. There's this history of Israel using, perceived anti-Semitism, or that anti-Semitism benefits them in that it drives this sort of mentality that there needs to be a Jewish state, or it drives more Jews to Israel. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's exactly correct. From its origins in the late 19th century, the greatest allies to the Zionists were the anti-Semites themselves. We have countless cases of the leading anti-Semites in Europe, including the person who coined the term anti-Semitism, was a raging Zionist. Istotsky, who was a Hungarian politician, he also in 1878 in the Hungarian parliament called for a Jewish state in Palestine. The most infamous non-Jewish Zionist of all, Arthur Balfour, was also a raging Zionist who prevented Jews from entering Britain in 1905 as they were being slaughtered in the masses in Eastern Europe, but then, of course, called for a Jewish state in Palestine in the infamous Balfour Declaration of 1917. And, of course, this alliance between the Zionists and the anti-Semites continues well into the 1930s, when, in the aftermath of Hitler's rise to power in 1933, Jews around the world were horrified, and there was almost a spontaneous boycott of Nazi Germany. And the German official Göring called the German Jews in for a meeting, who all said, "No, we're not going to call an end to this boycott," except the one a Jew in Germany who was willing to call for an end to the boycott, of course, was, guess who? It was the leader of the Zionist community in Germany, who was happy to ally with the Zionists because they had shared goals. The Nazis wanted to rid Germany of the Jews, and the Zionists also wanted the German Jews to move to Palestine, so they had shared goals. And obviously, this story carries through all the way to the present day, where you even have people like John Hagen, the founder of Christians United for Israel, a 10 million person strong organization, the largest Christian Zionist organization in the United States today. In his book that he published in the early 2000s, he actually blames the Jews for the rise of Hitler, and himself basically says it was the fault of the Jews that they got slaughtered in the millions during the Nazi Holocaust. So there's nothing new about this alliance, this unity between Zionists and anti-Semites. And just one final point I would make: in the aftermath of the Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, we have countless incidents of what I call manufactured anti-Semitism. These are incidents on college campuses. We had one at Yale, we had one at MIT, we had one at Columbia, about 6 of them that I've been able to document, in which Zionists are basically almost trying to manufacture an anti-Semitic incident. In one case in Colombia, it appears as if someone is basically pretending to be some kind of pro-Palestine person calling for supporting Hamas, even though it's very obvious this is basically an undercover Zionist agent. And so we have many, many other cases like this. And again, it's for the same reason that Zionists need anti-Semitism. That's the whole reason why Zionism needs to exist, because anti-Semitism persists, always will persist, always has and always will. It's sort of, if you're a Zionist, there are 3 laws of the universe. There's sort of gravity, mitochondrial DNA, and anti-Semitism.
I mean, someone comes to mind, Columbia professor Shai Davidai, who I saw attack you recently, Zachary. He's somebody who's just constantly manufacturing anti-Semitism, but I think he actually does believe that if you oppose Israel's right to kill babies, it's actually anti-Semitism. I guess I want to ask you a bit about the psychology here, because, I don't know if people know they're making it up, or if they genuinely are so used to impunity and being able to just be so openly genocidal that they've decided that any measure of accountability or having to behave like a normal person in another country in Israel, Palestine, They can be as genocidal as they want, Israelis, right? And maybe they're just so used to it. They go to a place like in Europe and they're like, well, yeah, why can't I just walk around chanting death to Arabs? And it's like not being able to chant death to Arabs and brag about killing children and destroying all their schools in Gaza is somehow perceived as like an act of bigotry. I guess, yeah. Do you think these people actually think that's the case? I don't know if that's a weird question, but I genuinely struggle to understand if they know like that this is ridiculous and that they're lying, or if there really is a perceived obsessive victimhood mentality. Like, unless I can drop 2,000-pound bunker bombs on babies, you're an anti-Semite.
That's an excellent point. I think Israeli Jews, and by the way, I would say this is true of many American Jews as well, and many Jews around the world, are raised with this victimhood mentality of we always have been and we always will be persecuted. This is, like I said, a law of the universe. And that affects every aspect of Israeli society. This perception that we're surrounded by countries that want to push us into the sea. We had this rhetoric in the 1948 war. The Zionist leaders claimed, "Oh, we were, facing a Holocaust." In fact, those calls that the Arabs wanted to push the Jews into the sea in 1948, those emanated from Israeli Zionist official propaganda. In fact, Shai Haskani, a historian who spent 15 years looking for such calls in Arab press and Arab pamphlets, never found such calls in 48. Israelis did the same thing in 67, claiming the Arab states wanted to push them into the sea. And again, same thing in the early 70s, all the Israeli generals and cabinet members in the security cabinet that made the decision to go to war later came out and said, we just invented that story. That was all a fiction. There was no threats of annihilation. That was just a fiction. And the same is true all the way to the present day, where Israelis constantly need to convince the world that everyone is trying to kill them. Anti-Semitism is a threat that rages around the world today, and you even saw that in the events in Amsterdam, you had Mossad agents that were actually embedded with the hooligans. They sent Mossad agents. It's unclear exactly what they were doing there, whether they were there to instigate. I think a more conspiratorial take on this would be this was very much intentional. They were looking for a fight that they could then later claim was an act of anti-Semitism perpetrated against them when they could obviously expect there would be a fight, there would be pushback at this rampaging around Amsterdam and all these vile acts of genocidal rhetoric being spewed out at the people of the Netherlands.
Zachary, if I could ask, there's something that I think gets left out or maybe forgotten in a lot of the discussion that Ronnie and I mean, we've talked about quite a bit, which is that these are the people that Palestinians and Lebanese are being asked to make peace with. Like when people are talking about, two states or whatever, everyone holds hands, we need, dialogue and discussion. This is really these are many of the people, this is a majority sentiment in Israel. And these, this incident in Amsterdam is really taking place in the context of this larger, now with Trump elected, this overtly genocidal rhetoric. I mean, it was genocidal before, but it's getting even more genocidal now where they're talking about actually annexing the West Bank. They're not even, pretending that this is about Hamas or terrorism or anything like that. What is your take on the direction of Israeli society, the emboldenment of, people like Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir? What direction is this going? How do you make sense of this?
Well, in the years, let's say in the decade that led up to October 7th, you had many calls from even mainstream Israeli leaders. Ayelet Shaked, for example, in 2014, basically compares Palestinians to insects and calls for their annihilation, says anyone who's even connected to any Hamas member is a legitimate target. A mother, a father, a brother, a son, they're all legitimate targets. She likened Palestinian women to basically giving birth to insects, essentially making these genocidal calls all the way going back to the 2014 war. Those genocidal calls continued in 2018. It was this time the Israeli defense minister at the time, Avigdor Lieberman, who again repeated the point that there are no innocents in Gaza. This was a statement made 5 years before Isaac Herzog made it in October 2023. Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, and so I think since October 2023, we've had not dozens, but not even hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of calls for genocide. I think a January 2024 poll indicated that 95% of Jewish Israelis believed there was either the right amount of force or not enough force being used in Gaza. To say things in different words, 95% of Israeli Jews are pro-genocide. And again, that's because of the rhetoric, the dehumanizing rhetoric that Israelis have been served up in Israeli media for years, if not decades. That is because of the education system, which completely ignores and overlooks Palestinians altogether. They're just not part of the Zionist story. Zionism, the state of Israel, is a state for Jews, to protect Jews wherever they are. I mean, that's at least the claim. And so Palestinians just have nothing to do with the story. To the extent that Palestinians are relevant, is that they're an obstacle, an impediment to the Zionist dream of creating a Jewish state in Palestine. And just one final point I would make here is that I think the phrase, "You show me the incentives and I will show you the outcome," is a phrase that should be much, much more popular when thinking about Israel-Palestine, because just imagine a Palestine that had been completely vacant. Imagine a Palestine that actually had been a land without a people. What a dream that would have been for the Zionist community in Palestine before 1940. And what a dream it would be even today. And so you show me the incentives and I will show you the outcome. The outcome in this case has been genocide.
Yeah, it's just incredibly, incredibly horrific. But I appreciate you coming on and breaking through that insane propaganda about Amsterdam. And I mean, now there was a game in France that I know had a lot of security at it, but it looks like nothing broke out. But I mean, it seems like everywhere Israelis go these days, they're just bringing their genocidal sentiments with them, and it's definitely making them look pretty bad on the world stage. So, Zachary Foster, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.